Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. This show is brought to you by Simpliflying, which has been helping build trust in travel for over a decade. Through in-depth conversation with aviation leaders, sustainability in the air breaks through the current clutter and provides a clear roadmap for the future. It's about time we embarked on creating a net zero future for the industry, together. This season of the podcast is brought to you by Carbon Click, leaders in managing carbon offsetting programs for top global airlines. Without further ado, here is your host, Shashank Nigam, CEO of Simpliflying.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air podcast with me, your host, Shashank Nigam. And today, my guest needs no introduction. Scott Kirby is the CEO of United, has been in leadership positions at multiple airlines. And the last time we spoke around a multitude of issues impacting United post-COVID, his eyes lit up when we spoke about sustainability. And in fact, I remember the last time we met, Scott, you were about to board the world's first flight fueled by sustainable aviation fuel. How did that go? Just a couple of days after we met.
It was great. It was exciting to be the first airline in the world to carry passengers on a flight with 100% sustainable aviation fuel running the engine. And we set out, it's a demonstration flight, but mostly to prove that it can be done and that it operates exactly like a regular jet fuel, which it did. But it was also amazing to me, and it's a sign of the hunger for real solutions in the world. The number of people that knew about it. A few hours after that, I was at the Business Roundtable, which is, CEOs of big corporations. And, a dozen of them came up to me to talk about the flight, and they were excited about it. Like, I was surprised they even knew about it. It was 2 hours after we landed. But it just proves that people really are looking for answers and looking for solutions.
Now, it's not just that your eyes lit up when we spoke about sustainable aviation, but United has taken a pole position when it comes to sustainability. But you don't have pressure like the EU airlines do. You don't have consumer pressure like some other airlines do. Yet you have taken a very commanding stance when it comes to sustainability. Why is that?
Well, the pressure for me comes from the fact that I have 7 kids and I want to leave a better world behind for them. I mean, it really is. Not just for them, but for everyone. And I have been interested in climate change in particular since I was in college. The science has been fascinating. Back then, it wasn't called climate change. It was called global warming. And it was a theory back in the 80s. But it was a theory with a lot of substance. And it was going to take time to prove it, but a theory with a lot of substance behind it. And so I've been interested in it for a long time. I also, because of that, recognize there's very few people that still recognize the severity of the impacts of what climate change will mean to the globe and how we reach tipping points that essentially become impossible, almost impossible to come back from, or tens of thousands of years to come back from. And if we don't solve it and solve it pretty soon, we're going to hit some of those tipping points. And the world is forever changed if we do that. And because of that, I view it as the biggest issue for our generation to solve and leave. And if we don't, our kids and grandkids are going to curse us for not doing it. So that's plenty of motivation for me to try to do the right thing and make a difference.
Absolutely. It always works better when there's a personal motivation to this. But in our industry, airlines are not in a state where we can just tomorrow say, buy an electric car and stop going to the gas station.
Yeah.
Right? Aviation is hard to decarbonize. What are United's net zero goals and how are you going to get there?
Yeah, United is one of those hard to decarbonize industries. It's not the only one, but at United, there's really 3 pillars that we're looking at. One is sustainable aviation fuel, which we've talked a little bit about, but United's commitment to sustainable aviation fuel is now more than double all the rest of the world's airlines combined, which is pretty amazing. But it's still a drop in the bucket. But we're investing in companies and trying to grow them and scale them up so that it can be a huge part of the solution. It's the biggest part of the solution. Second one is technology. So electric aircraft, hydrogen-powered aircraft, there's going to be a market for that, particularly smaller airplanes flying shorter distances. But they're not going to take over the plane, flying across the Atlantic with a lot of customers on board. And then the third, and I think most important pillar, is carbon sequestration. And United has made a commitment to be 100% green and said we will do it without using traditional carbon offsets. Carbon offsets are basically people saying that they're going to plant trees or pretending that they're, or saying they're going to not cut down trees. And look, there's nothing wrong with planting trees. But the problem is it's not scalable. One, the problem is most of those programs are fraud. They're not real. They're trees that were never going to be cut down anyway. And so they aren't really doing anything to change the climate. But more importantly, they're not scalable even if they were real. If we planted every square inch of the planet that could grow trees, it would account for less than 5 months of mankind's emissions. What that means is when everyone is relying on carbon offsets on planting trees as their way to get to net zero, we've accounted for 5 months of mankind's emissions and not the next 100 years, and we won't be close. And so we have to do something else. And carbon sequestration is the only thing that we have that's scalable, that's an answer today.
There are so many things I want to touch upon here. Let's start with carbon sequestration. It's expensive and it's not yet scalable. It's really far out in the future. I know you've just invested in a company that does carbon sequestration directly to fuel, to SAF.
Yeah.
How does sequestration scale, and how do you bring the cost down?
So I think carbon sequestration can scale. Most of the people that I talk to that are experts, they obviously believe it. And really what carbon sequestration is it's taking carbon directly out of the atmosphere and it's putting it in the rocks. That's the normal process that the planet recycles carbon. It's just greatly accelerating it. But it's really using the natural process. I believe we can get it to be cost effective. If we could put a price on carbon today, if we could get governments to put a price on carbon around the world, carbon sequestration would grow on its own. It's not economic today, but neither were wind and solar 20 years ago. 20 years ago, everyone thought wind and solar could never compete with fossil fuels. But today it's cheaper to produce a megawatt of electricity with wind or solar because there were government support, government credits to build and grow the industry. It scaled, it got economies of scale, and now it is cheaper. And exactly the same thing can happen with carbon sequestration. We just need the right government policy and support to drive the growth of that industry.
Now, the interesting thing is, I'm curious to know how this will work for me as a passenger. If I'm flying United from Newark to Heathrow, which I'm doing this summer, is there an option for me to say, okay, offset my flight using carbon sequestration, and will some company in Iceland suck this and put in a rock? How does this work from a passenger perspective?
Yeah, there's not yet, but what we do have an option for corporations to sign up with something called the Eco Skies Alliance, where they're purchasing sustainable aviation fuel instead of regular jet fuel, because sustainable aviation fuel is also more expensive. What we're doing at United is reinvesting those proceeds in companies that are trying to grow and scale and build sustainable aviation fuel. The biggest thing for sustainable aviation fuel, though, is we need the right government support. The challenge that sustainable aviation fuel has is there's no government support for it. So if you have a feedstock, you can either turn it into jet fuel or you can turn it into diesel, but the government pays you a couple of bucks extra to turn it into diesel. So of course you turn it into diesel. The frustrating thing is that's an industry that can be electrified. Ground transport can be electrified. And we need to get jet fuel on the same, sustainable aviation fuel on the same level playing field as renewable diesel and ethanol.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned earlier that United has committed to double the SAF supply of the entire rest of the world's airlines combined. Now, when will I, as a customer, be seeing SAF on board my United flights?
You already are. In fact, our flights out in Los Angeles have SAF essentially on every flight. We're blending it directly into our jet fuel supply out of Los Angeles. And we have to have more locations. There's a facility being built outside of Chicago right now. Well, hopefully we'll ultimately feed Chicago. Another point that's a problem with regulation, that all gets shipped to California because California does have credits for fuel. So if you produce sustainable aviation fuel in Chicago, economically, you almost have to ship it, which burns extra carbon, to California. That's why we need federal policy that's regular across the whole country. Because those economic incentives are really important to growing the industry and building the industry. But right now, it's only available in California.
Right. No, that's a very important point, right? It's not available everywhere. There's shortage of supply in general. On the flip side, though, given that there's so much limited supply of SAF, United locking in a huge amount, doesn't that deprive other airlines of SAF?
Well, it's not that the supply is so limited that that's not the issue. The issue is creating supply. The reason we have double the commitment of anyone else is we have gone out and helped build companies that are creating it. The supply doesn't exist. We have to create it ourselves. That's part of the reason that, and I hope, by the way, that's a record that doesn't stand long, that everyone else starts doing the same thing. But the only way to get SAF is to fund and build the companies that are creating SAF. It's not an option to just go off and buy it, except in minuscule amounts. And that's why we're so much bigger, is because we're building the supply. We're not taking the supply from someone else. We're actually creating the supply.
Right. And for SAF, what percentage of United flights, percentage-wise, currently have SAF, and do you have a percentage as interim goals for SAF as well?
So we want to grow our SAF to 10% of our total use by the end of the decade. That tells you something. I mean, that's hard to do, but it's still just 10%. But by the time we get to 10%, we will be far enough on. If you look at the cost curve, the supply curves for wind, solar, the same is going to be true for SAF. It's a curve that looks like this. It goes flat and then it goes really steep inflection up. And so the point is to have enough feedstock and enough companies building feed, because you need multiple feedstock to do it, that it can scale to really get to what we hope will be 50% of our total needs in the decades to come.
Wow, that is significant, and I'm hoping that will reduce. Now, SAF, of course, it reduces emissions dramatically, but it doesn't bring them down to zero, right? So you mentioned SAF, you mentioned sequestration, and then you mentioned technology, right? And United, through the United Ventures arm, has taken, again, a pole position investing in the future of aircraft technology. But that's really long term. What's the play here? Is it really just long play for technology?
There are shorter term plays. A lot of it is long term. I mean, some of these hard to decarbonize industries, you can't snap your fingers overnight and change it. SAF is, of course, the biggest one. That's also a technology play. The biggest thing that we could do in the short term, and the lowest hanging fruit, and it's so frustrating that we can't get it done, is air traffic reform. We could cut emissions in the United States by 10 to 15%. Just by essentially using the GPS that we have on the airplane. Today we can't. If you fly across the country, you will notice that instead of flying in a straight line, you occasionally do slight right turns, slight left turns. You're flying highways in the sky that were laid down back in the 1920s. It used to be bonfires. Now they're radio signals. But you fly over the same radio signals that used to exist that used to be bonfires in the 2020s. And we've got GPS technology, but we can't use it to fly. We literally could cut emissions by 10 to 15%. Oh, by the way, save you the same amount of time. You've got the time that you spend in the air.
Right. No, it is definitely a long road. Now, you have, through United Ventures, invested in Zoravia, Hart, Archer. Do you see electric as the future of aviation?
I think electric is the future for small and short-haul aircraft that aren't flying very far. But it is not the future for big airplanes, flying long distances. The weight of batteries we would need to fly a plane from Newark to India far exceeds the maximum takeoff weight of the airplane, without even considering you need to have an airplane and you need to have passengers, and the batteries just don't have nearly enough energy density for big airplanes to fly long distance, which is why electric and hydrogen have a role to play in part of the aviation system. But big airplanes there's nothing even on the drawing board that doesn't require jet fuel. And so making it sustainably is the important thing to do. If you want something really far out, I will tell you the one thing that I've talked to someone about that could, which is, for those that have followed climate change, the silver bullet is fusion energy. Which is completely clean energy. But it's replicating the process that happens at the center of the sun, merging hydrogen into create larger elements and getting energy out of it. But it's been 20 years away for 30 years, and it's still 20 years away. But there are people that say they've got modular fusion reactors that are, like the size of 4 refrigerators that would fit on an airplane. But that's way, way off in the future and probably really unlikely. I don't think it's ever going to be real.
Wow. Nuclear fusion on
Yeah,
my flight.
yeah,
That's something
yeah,
I hope to experience
yeah.
sometime in the future. One of the investments, one of the more newsworthy announcements were actually your investment in Boom
Yeah.
Aviation, the supersonic jet. Tell us about that. Why Boom?
Yeah, so we've worked with technology providers throughout. At United, we also view ourselves as the leader in global aviation. So it's logical if anyone's going to do it, it would have been United. And supersonic is something our customers would really love, and the technology has come a long way, an awful long way. I mean, the supersonic was really designed in the late '50s, early '60s. The Concorde was. And technology obviously has come a long way. It's the first aircraft engine ever designed from the ground up to run on 100% sustainable aviation fuel. So it was important to do it sustainably. But it fills a market need that customers want, and our customers and employees have been really excited about it. I was surprised at the number of emails I got from friends that said, "How do I book a flight on the first? How do I book a ticket on the first flight?" I'm like, well, it's a few years away, so you can't. But I appreciate the attitude.
I think you need to do Elon Musk launching the Cybertruck and take bookings the day you announce it. And your forward bookings is going to pay
I'm
for
going to
it.
leave being Elon Musk to Elon. No one does it like him.
Exactly. Now, one of the reasons back in the day, supersonic didn't work was it was really inefficient in terms of fuel consumption.
Yeah.
How do you overcome this problem going forward? Doom, it's not electric.
Yeah, the energy, the technology is different. So the Concorde had four engines and it ran on afterburner. Afterburner is you run the fuel through the normal engine and then you just dump raw fuel into the exhaust, and the exhaust is so hot it ignites the fuel and creates extra power. If you ever see, military fighter jets, doing their screaming by, and you look at the tail, the reason there's fire in the back is that's the afterburner. But afterburner is incredibly inefficient. This airplane runs on two engines, like all the other airplanes we have, and burns fuel in the normal way. So it is a fraction of the fuel burn that the Concorde would have experienced. But you would expect that. The Concorde was literally 60-year-old technology compared to what this aircraft is running on.
Exactly. Now, one of the things Boom's founders have said is it will run on 100% SAF. Is that something United is planning to do?
It is, and in fact, we insisted on that before we would purchase the airplane.
Okay, so one of the things is because it consumes a lot of fuel. One of the stats I read was if there was a Boom flight using 100% SAF, it would basically use up 80% of Europe's SAF supply just for one flight. Isn't that taking SAF away from lots of passengers for less than 100 passengers doing supersonic?
I think that's the wrong way to look at it, because it's flights in the future, and the SAF supply has to be different in the future to make it work. So trying to compare what's going to happen with a supersonic airplane, decades from now, with the supply for an industry that's just beginning is an apples and oranges comparison.
Fair enough. Hopefully the future supply will be enough for everyone. Going back to United Ventures, it's a recent initiative. It's a little different from other corporate venture efforts from airlines. What's the strategy behind United Ventures?
It really is to look to the future and to use our clout as a user of the technology to change the world. And we look for world-changing technologies, whether it's in sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen-powered airplanes, carbon sequestration, supersonic airplanes. They don't all have to be world-changing. But we're biased to find world-changing solutions, and you've mentioned one of them, which is one of our partners, is going to use renewable energy, so wind or solar, we can literally take carbon out of the atmosphere and ultimately turn it into, combined with water, and turn it into sustainable aviation fuel, literally making jet fuel out of thin air. Those kinds of, world-changing products are hard to do in the normal corporate environment. And so, UAV is designed to be outside of it, willing to, swing for the fences, willing to take chances on new technologies that are still being developed, because that's how you get them developed, is for somebody to invest in them early. And so that's really what UAV is designed to do. And no one else is doing it because I think we have a different culture and a different attitude at United, that we're willing to take risks. We want to be a leader. We know everything we do won't work out. But if we just hit, we get one or two hits, it can really change the world.
Absolutely. One of the things that stood out to me about what you just said was that United wants to be a user. You want to be a customer as well as propagate the technology, right?
Yeah.
Is that the key marker for whether to invest in a technology, whether United can use it or not?
Well, it doesn't have to be, but we're certainly biased towards things that we can use because we also bring expertise then. So we're working with Boom, Archer, with Hart. We work with all of them to also help them with our expertise, help them design the airplane. The airplane that Boom is building is going to be different because it was built from an engineering perspective. We're building it now to take the customer comfort. One of the other things, if you ever flew the Concorde, it was cramped and like this because it was an airplane. And so designing it, that it works, figuring out how to work with the FAA certification process. How are these planes going to work in airspace and airflow? An Archer airplane can't just, fly from Midtown Manhattan to Newark Airport the same as it might, in another part of the world where there's not crowded airspace. And so we bring expertise to the table that helps them. They can create a great product for us, innovative technology for our customers, but it's a symbiotic win-win relationship.
How much of this is strategic investment versus financial investment, or is it both from United?
It's mostly strategic, to the extent that we get it's almost exclusively strategic. To the extent we get a financial pay, we negotiate to try to get a financial payoff if it's successful. If it's really successful, we ought to share in the benefit, so we negotiate hard to do that. But we view it mostly as a strategic investment, but believe, and look, it's already happening, that financially, we've made a really good return on those investments. But it's more strategic than it is financial.
Recently, there was criticism about corporate venture models, which do strategic investments and not financial, because you get future shares at a very cheap price, and if it doesn't work out, you haven't really lost any money.
Yeah.
Is that something that's come up in your discussions?
I don't think so. Well, no, I haven't heard it from anyone. I think of it much like venture investing, which a venture investor is trying to do it for financial reasons, but they recognize they're going to hit a few home runs and they're going to have a bunch that don't work out. And I suspect the same will be true. I mean, I hope they all work out, but I suspect, as many investments as we're making and going to continue to make, they won't all work out. But you take sustainable aviation fuel, we've made a number of investments using different feedstock, as an example. And, some of them are going to, and also sometimes a different chemical process to get there. And time will tell which of those can be scaled and become economic, and they probably all won't, but many of them will. And so we're trying to make a lot of bets, but that's strategic and financial. You make a lot of bets on different feedstock and different chemical processes in SAF, the chances that you get something that's big and real are higher. The chances that you get a financial payoff are also bigger because you've spread your bets around.
Right, exactly. Now let's talk about the passenger side of things. Bill Gates talks about this concept called green premium, in which the cost of jet fuel is X and the cost of SAF is 5X right now. The cost of carbon sequestration is even more. Airlines can't be expected to pay for this difference. Who pays? Is it me as a passenger who pays? Is it government subsidies? Who pays for this green premium, the difference, the cost of going green?
Well, you got to be careful when people talk about those kinds of numbers. They're talking about what it is today. And I keep going back to, if you'd have said that 20 years ago, you'd have never built a solar farm. You'd have never built a wind farm. There'd be none, because that was true 20 years ago. And it's not going to be true in the future. We've got to get to the future by investing to get there. So you shouldn't pretend that today's economics are going to be the same 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, because they're not. That's probably the most important point. I think the more substantive part of the answer, which applies not just to aviation, it applies to all industries, is the best way to do this is a price on carbon. I mean, if you just put a price on carbon, it's such simple policy. It's so easy, and every business will figure it out. And as long as you have a price on carbon, everyone will figure it out. It's so easy, but in government, it's hard to get. Sometimes the answer is obvious, but getting there is not as easy as it sounds. But that's the answer.
It takes some time. It takes some time and effort.
Well, and look, truth be told, without doing that or something close to that, it's going to be hard for the globe to get this solved. If we try to do each little thing one at a time, and every industry is in there lobbying for their little piece, the highest emissions for the globe were last year, and it's going to be broken this year. The highest amount of coal burned in the history of mankind was last year. It's going to be broken this year. Like, the numbers are going up. We need a price on carbon if we're going to actually solve it. We've got to be serious, and we got to realize it's not easy. Like, the problem with getting a price on carbon, in Washington or around the globe, is people want to have their cake and eat it too. You can't. There's no free lunch. I mean, you got to pay for it.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things I've noticed in the past couple of years at United, through the pandemic is what you told me when we first spoke, which is build back better. You wanted to come back and build back better. And that has been coupled with this.
That's a loaded term now.
Exactly. That was coupled with, visionary storytelling. United with boom in the middle of the pandemic. United's stance on staff vaccination. Now, United adding, I think, double the capacity across the Atlantic compared to the rest of the airlines, I believe, from North America. What's changed? There's a new vigor here post-COVID. What's changed at United?
Yeah, we're really proud of what we're doing at United. Our people are proud. And we're just focused on trying to do the right thing. I mean, one of the lessons that certainly was emphasized, whether I knew it before or not, doing the right thing pays off. That's not the reason to do the right thing. The reason to do the right thing is just because it's the right thing. But it pays off. And we did so much during COVID, whether it was our sustainability initiatives, we're not talking about on this one, but our diversity initiatives and the Aviate Academy out in Goodyear, Arizona, or we're the first airline to require masks on airplanes. We're the only airline to ever actually run the airflow when passengers were on the ground, so that you got the benefits of that. It cost us money. It cost us $50 million to do that, but we did it, and it protected customers. Didn't even know, protected customers even though they didn't know it. But it was the right thing to do. Or vaccine requirements, like just so much of what we've done, just doing the right thing. It also turns out to be really simple. I mean, people get lost in detailed spreadsheets and PowerPoints. You just say, what's the right thing to do? Like, your job's a whole lot easier, and you can go have fun with your kids.
Yeah, exactly. And this vision, it's definitely been communicated out to the world from strategic perspective. How do you communicate this vision to customers and United employees?
Well, I've told the board at the end of the year, this past year, and I still now say it all the time, that it turns out I have the easiest job of anyone at United. I ask them to forget about that when they're setting my compensation, but I do have the easiest job because I only have one real responsibility, which is to make our employees proud. All the things we've talked about today are the kinds of things that make them proud. There's a lot more for customers, whether it's Connection Saver, buying new airplanes with great interiors. Like, there's all kinds of things that make them proud. But if they're proud, then if something goes wrong, they're going to want to go above and beyond to make sure that customers don't leave with that as the impression of the norm at United. But even when things go well, I had a CEO who's a global customer emailed me, actually texted yesterday, that the fourth time in a row he was on a flight where the captain either came out and talked to the first class customers or hand wrote them a note. He's like, how is this happening? Those are the kinds of things. Those are 4 different captains. We can't force them to do that. 4 different captains who are proud of United Airlines, and they want the customers to feel that way. That is changing. Our flight attendants, they've been amazing. Like, our incidents, the number of incidents we've had on United airplanes are 10 times lower than what has happened at other airlines. Not 0, but 10 times lower than what have happened on it, because they do an amazing job, because they're proud. And when you're proud, you just deliver for the customers. And as much as anything, that's what we're doing, trying to create an environment and a culture where our people are proud. And, I'm one person, but if we've got 100,000 people that are proud and want to go above and beyond, we're going to be the greatest airline in the history of aviation.
That is fantastic. And that's something that never goes wrong. Make your people proud.
Yeah.
And it will come back to reward, not just you, but everyone who's dealing with the brand. sustainability, going back to it, do you feel that your sustainability efforts are making United employees proud?
I know that they are. I mean, I hear about it all the time. There's a lot of things that make them proud, but sustainability is one of those that particularly there's an awful lot of people that are passionate about it. And they're really proud of the leadership role and the honesty that we have. Like, it's not a marketing issue for us. I say to people, anytime that the sustainability group reports to the head of marketing, you can know it's probably fraud because it's just marketing. And I joke about, like, who's the chief sustainability officer. The truth is, it's me. Like, there's nobody that's as passionate about it as I am. We have one, but and Lauren is wonderful. But it has to start at the top for it to make a difference. And if it doesn't, it becomes a marketing issue of, like, how do I get away with saying I'm green at the cheapest possible dollar? That's not what we do at United. We're trying to do the right thing.
Right. No, and kudos to you for that.
Thank you.
Final question: your advice to other airline CEOs who sometimes are struggling with just even getting started. There's not enough SAF. There's a wild west out there when it comes to technology. How does an airline CEO today get started with sustainability?
I encourage them to learn more about it. I mean, this is not unique to airlines. This is other CEOs. There's not many that know enough about it, about what's real and what's not. And sometimes they believe they're doing the right thing, when their team says, if we write $1 million check to the Conservancy Fund, they'll offset 100% of our emissions. But they don't realize that what is really happening isn't changing anything in the world. And so first and foremost is learn about it. And the second thing is, don't get lost in what is happening today. Far too many of them get stuck with, well, here's the cost of SAF, and I don't know where to go buy it today. Because this should be like safety. It's not a competitive issue. It should be about all of us raising the standards to the highest level possible. But that's mostly what I do. And if they don't do it, then you should fly on an airline that does. It looks like we have a guest in my background.
That's fine. That's why this is a podcast, so he can come and dance, and we won't have the BBC professor moment here.
Oh, you can have him in there. He's one. I told him when we're done with this, we're going to the park. He likes to play in the creek with his brothers, so he's ready to go. He must have finished his homework, is what this means.
Well, that's good news then. And I'll wrap it up so that you can get out and spend some time on the creek. But Scott, this was a pleasure speaking with you. I really appreciate you being very honest about the challenges as well as the vision. And I'm really looking forward to some of these investments you've made coming to fruition.
Awesome. Thank you. I enjoyed it as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. We hope you liked it and will share it with your network. Please also leave us a review. Awareness is the key to a green future. Your support will help our insights on sustainable aviation reach a wider audience. In addition, for every single listen of this podcast, we will plant a tree. And for every single review, we will plant 50 trees. You can also write to us at podcast@simpliflying.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website, simpliflying.com, and join the movement.